I think we forgot as people how unifying clean energy can be, how good it can be for people, how much prosperity it can bring to local communities, how many jobs it can bring. I felt like I was failing every single day at Solstice. And the trick is just to get up one more time than the number of times you've been knocked down. That is the trick to this whole entrepreneurship thing.
Welcome to How to Help a Few Billion People, a podcast where we feature entrepreneurs who prioritize helping billions of people, not making billions of dollars in profit. The entrepreneur that we're going to talk to today is Steph Speirs, and she is incredible. She is a two-time entrepreneur, and in between her entrepreneurial endeavors, she taught at the Yale School of Management. At Yale, she's taught about climate, and her roots are deep into climate. Her first venture, Solstice, which she successfully exited, started actually as a nonprofit, a attempt to try and figure out how to get solar into people who didn't have the credit scores or financing means to benefit from the power of solar. Eventually, they built a technology platform and a financing platform in order to help figure out how to do that via community solar farms. Her work there was incredible, and I felt like we just scratched the surface in this episode, but it's enough to walk away with some really great tips on how to care for yourself, how to build a team of support around you, and how to navigate some really, really big decisions when things go wrong in life. Because, and as you'll hear from Steph, they do, and they can be tragic. But Steph's guidance on how to prep for those is really, really incredible. Then we're going to talk about what exactly ignites the bug to go at an entrepreneurial adventure again, and what insights first-time entrepreneur Steph would give to second-time entrepreneur Steph. Steph is wise, she is insightful, she's inspirational, and her lessons are incredibly valuable. I hope you like this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. And before we dive in, I just have one quick ask of you. Our goal in this episode is to give real value to you, the future world builders, the future business builders that are also prioritizing people and planet above profits. So if you have questions, if you have tips, if you have suggestions on how we can improve, just drop me an email, mark@helpingbillions.org, or just let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you, and your feedback, your ratings, your endorsements, your sharing of this podcast are helping grow this movement. Thank you so much for tuning in. And without further ado, I can't wait to introduce you to Steph Speirs. Steph, thank you so much for joining us on the Helping Billions podcast. I'm so excited for our episode today.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me, Mark.
Yeah, it's really our pleasure. And, Steph, when I first heard you speak, which was just, 6 months ago during Climate Week on a panel with Acumen, EY, some other organizations working to build up social enterprises, I was really struck by your experience, both having built one social enterprise and exiting that, and then taking your learnings into Yale and teaching those, and then now starting your own venture. And I'm really excited to jump into what that was like for you individually going through that. Well, really, I should say those transitions. But let's go back all the way in time. Like, how did you even get into the social enterprise space to begin with?
I think I might have been meant to be in the social enterprise space, even though I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My dad was a failed entrepreneur, and so I never wanted to do entrepreneurship because I'd only seen the bad side of that. And then I realized that entrepreneurship is just realizing that there's a gap in the world and thinking that you might be able to fill that gap with a solution somehow. And starting with that simple notion, my co-founders and I started Solstice because we noticed that people couldn't get solar on their rooftop. Actually, 4 out of 5 Americans were locked out of the solar market, and they couldn't get the savings on their electricity bills. They couldn't access clean energy without rooftop solar. But then around the time we started this company, Solstice, in 2014, there's a new type of solar coming across the United States called community solar. So community solar meant that you didn't have to put solar on your rooftop. You could buy a portion of a shared solar farm. You could actually save 10% on your electricity bill. You didn't have to disconnect from utility. It was a great value proposition. So my teammates and I decided to start this new company, making sure that it was accessible to everyone. So that was how I got my start in social entrepreneurship.
And I mean, especially having had that experience, like you mentioned your father's experience going through entrepreneurship and kind of seeing the like the hardship of that journey. Like, at what point in this were you like, wait a second, I'm becoming an entrepreneur? Like, do I really want to do this? Like, how like even more like bring them into your brain. Like, what prompted you to like see that opportunity and ultimately go for it?
We thought that this was going to be a big opportunity across the country because so few people can put solar on the rooftop. The vast majority of households cannot put it on their rooftop, but a lot of people want clean energy. They want to save money on their electricity bills. And if we could facilitate that, like that is a worthwhile mission to try to make happen. At the same time, it was never like the whole entrepreneurship journey from starting it to 10 years later, leaving it after selling the company at, I think, year 8. It was never an easy journey. And so the thing that kept me going was that I never did it for a certain outcome. Like we got so privileged and lucky to be able to sell the company and have a great exit, but we never did it for that reason. We did it because the day to day was worthwhile, because we liked the journey, even the challenge and the headaches and the obstacles that would fall from the sky into your lap and you'd have to deal with. All of that was made worthwhile because every day was overall net positive day. And I think that's because I worked with amazing teammates. When I think about my co-founder, Sandhya Murali, and how she's still one of my closest friends today after really being in the trenches together for a
I
decade,
bet.
that is lucky because that's not always what happens in startups.
Yeah, it's something so interesting. You said something that I actually wasn't really expecting, which is, oftentimes on the show, especially people are like, look, it's not about the money, it's the mission, it's the purpose. It's like, I saw this problem and it just needed to be solved. And undoubtedly, I've heard you speak before, like that's a driver for you. But what you also said, it's like, yeah, and I like the work, right? It's like, I like being in there. I like building. I like the challenges. I like every day being, every day being different. Is like, at what point did you have that realization? Like, hey, I'm doing this work, and like, I just, yeah, there's this bigger like purpose story, this impact story, and I'm also just liking what I do every day, even if it's hard.
It is about the building. You're right. Like building something from nothing that it didn't exist before, and you can see is tangibly helping people. We by the time I left, we were managing 300 megawatts of projects. Like each megawatt serves about 150 customers, so that's tens of thousands of customers really getting to save money on their electricity bills. And I would talk to these customers and they would say, I didn't even realize I could get solar because I couldn't get rooftop solar. I didn't know community solar was a thing. And I didn't know to trust it because honestly, it sounds a little too good to be true, like
Yeah.
nothing on my roof. I save money on my electricity bill. I don't have to do anything really. It all happens behind the scenes using kind of payment software that we built. So people were skeptical, and building that trust with communities is hard, but it's so worthwhile because you get to build these deep relationships with the people you work with your customers. And so those day-to-day moments were worthwhile. And then the bigger mission that you're talking about, like we were getting people access to clean energy who had never had access before. We were getting them savings on their bills. A lot of them were fixed income. I grew up in a fixed income household. My mom was a single mom. She raised 3 kids on a salary below the poverty line. She's an immigrant and got incredibly discriminated against when she was working in a call center and told to go back to her old country. So there's just a lot of meaningful, small, quiet moments along the journey that keep the trudging through the trenches so worthwhile.
So, Steph, as you've been going on, or as you were in this entrepreneurial journey, I'm curious, what were you doing to find your own support as you were navigating the things that, give you energy or detract, or, the hope to keep going? What did support look like for you in this process?
I think support is everything, and 3 things come to mind. First, I definitely did those CEO fellowship groups. The first funder we had was Echoing Green, and from there I got to meet a lot of other social entrepreneurs who were struggling. And even now there's a group of us that meets monthly. 11, 12 years later.
Amazing.
And we share the ups and downs, and that's been very special. Number two is the most important founder sometimes in a startup is the partner of the actual founder. And so
That's real.
my partner, then boyfriend, now husband, it was the most incredible presence throughout the last decade. He was really a foundational rock for me. I was able to share things with him I wasn't able to share with even my co-founder, because ultimately I'm managing everyone else's motivations. So that was crucial. And then number three, I'd say, is having a deep relationship to the land and to the planet and to nature has been very, very helpful. You know, no matter where you are in life, to be able to go out into nature and reconnect with the awe and wonder that nature provides, and the fact that nature is so unifying. You know, we sometimes forget that. So those are the three touch points that kept me going in dark moments.
Yeah, I look on all of those. I hear you, and on that last one, I was like, trail running has been my therapist so many times. Of just out, and then I'll like just sit by a tree for a while and just soak it in. But I'm curious for you on the personal side, like where does that connection with nature come from for you? Is that something that you grew up doing much of? Was it something you kind of found later in life?
More later in life. I mean, I grew up in an incredibly natural, beautiful place, which is Hawaii. And Hawaii, the Hawaiian values suffuse everything in Hawaii. So yes, a reverence for nature, a view of nature as if it's an ancestor and not just the environment. And you treat the planet differently if you think of it and as an ancestor. Amazing. So that was core, but I didn't really discover it until later in my life. I became a wilderness trip leader in college for incoming freshmen. That was the first time I ever went on a backpacking trip, when I showed up as a freshman to college.
Very cool.
And then in recent years, during the pandemic, actually, I realized that I was afraid of swimming in the ocean. I couldn't swim deeper than 3 feet. And being from Hawaii, that's a little embarrassing.
I was going to say, yeah.
I decided I was going to become comfortable with the ocean. And so I took a free diving course. Within 1 weekend, they teach you how to go from 3 feet to 60 feet on one breath of air. And since then, I have been free diving. I've taken up spearfishing and hunting too, as a way to connect deeper with the land. I've never felt more connected to ancestors before.
Yeah. Wow. Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I would love to go down that free driving rabbit hole, but we'll save that for maybe a follow-up episode.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said you also turned to for support was a community of other entrepreneurs, and you mentioned Echo and Green. I think we'd be remiss if anybody's listening to this and doesn't know of Echo and Green, search them, find them, follow them. The work that they do to spur and support early stage social innovators and entrepreneurs is really incredible, and I think second to none in terms of that earlier stage support. And they take early and big bets on founders, and you're obviously one of them, and you're a testament to some of the incredible entrepreneurs that come out of that program. And one of the things that you mentioned is that you applied for a lot of programs, and you got into this one. And I'm curious from your side of things, what do you think it was? Like what was the key? What got you in, at that early stage?
Echoing Green has been the first funder for a lot of really influential startups in the social enterprise space. They were the first funder for Teach for America. I have a lot of other founders in my cohort that have gone on to create social enterprises that have scaled incredibly large. They focus really on character of the founder. They focus on, do you have resilience and grit? Because they know it's going to be a hard journey, especially when they invest that early. Ultimately, they understand that a startup that's successful is not necessarily the one that gets the right answer out of the gate. It's the organization that is learning the fastest. Because you're going to be punched in the face a few times along this journey. And are you going to learn from that and adapt and figure out how to move forward? So I think they put a lot of effort into really understanding your motivations. Why are you doing this? Do you have the ability to build a coalition to support you? Because you're nothing without a coalition. And I think that's I guess that's what got us in, because ultimately at my heart, I'm a community organizer. I think that hard, impossible things are only possible when you get a group of people working on them together. Uh, and and then, when I think of the other fellowship programs that we did that really were influential in giving us that support, it was also the Acumen Fellowship that I did. It was Techstars for really tech founders to get support from other founders. And then Elemental, specifically in the climate world, Elemental Impact is a group. It's an accelerator, but they also now do financing for projects and equity for companies. And they really put you in touch with a lot of other startup founders in climate. So all of that, building that over time, was really important to our trajectory.
Yeah, so interesting to hear. And for the listeners, in the show notes, we'll drop links to all of these organizations. One of the pieces that you mentioned related to, what Equine Green looks for and supports, right, is, look, we know the earliest business model isn't going to survive first contact with customers. So we want to see how you can pivot, how you can learn. Bring me on the journey that you had at Solstice. Like, what was the original business model that you went out to market with? What did it evolve to, and then ultimately what led to scale for you all?
Ultimately, we started as a nonprofit, and we were focused on making community solar as a product more accessible to people. So we would actually go out to communities and do community organizing to educate and enroll people in community solar projects. And then we had a realization a couple years in that we really, in order to make this product more accessible, we actually needed to build software, because the software was an important part of enrolling easily with multiple languages and in connecting people's utility accounts to their community solar account, such that they didn't have to worry about complicated billing. So we had to really build that payments platform. So 2 years into our journey, we spun out a for-profit and we built that software. And over time, that software had more machine learning algorithms built in that could predict customer behavior. And then the other thing we did was we created a new kind of credit score, but for energy. Little known fact, you need a really good credit score in order to get access to solar power in this country. Generally 680 and above. Half the country doesn't have that credit score. So we're already excluding people, even though this product saves them money on their electricity bill. So we created something called the Energy Score, which was our own proprietary credit scoring system that was based on your utility repayment history rather than mortgages and credit cards so much. And it proved that we could sign up more people, even though they had lower FICO credit scores. We could sign up more people for clean energy, and it more accurately predicted whether they would pay their bills compared to FICO. So it's an example of,
Wow.
The technology evolving to be more inclusive. But our original business model was really focused on the community organizing side. We never stopped that. It just took on more and more tech.
As I was reading a bit more and even listening to some of the other episodes that you've been on, I was like listening to your pitch. I'm like, I feel like these are the pitches that I'm hearing now, where like everything is an AI pitch, but you were like OG of this, doing this, over a decade back, figuring that out and bringing that tech, and I think some of that innovation around like what you're calling like the credit score parallel, in order to figure out who can most benefit and fund this, where there's just such an obvious gap, I think is such a valuable social enterprise lesson, right? Because oftentimes I think where effective social entrepreneurs such as yourselves are able to do is to find these like really big market inefficiencies, where the structures in theory that were put in place in order to help remove risk also create, in many cases, and exacerbate inequalities, right? And so when you're able to bridge those gaps as an entrepreneur, and I'm curious, how did you discover those? Was there anything, whether it was a framework or a principle, or just curiosity, but where and how did you end up moving through understanding of users and community groups in such a way that led you to identify that market inefficiency and then therefore business model?
You know, the it goes back to how FICO was created, the FICO credit score. It was invented in 1956 as an objective measure of our credit worthiness. But then you find out what goes into it, and you're like, wait a second, it doesn't take into account utility repayment history, it doesn't take into account rental history or cell phone payment history. It's really taking into account only credit card and mortgage history. And that privileges higher income people. So there are all these low income people who are paying their utility bills, phone bills on time, and they're not getting credit for it. And then you realize, like, why do markets systemically exclude low income people? Often it's a perception of risk. But then when you dig into that risk and how we measure the risk, you're like, wait, that perception of risk is so much greater than the real risk. And we just are lacking data to show what the real risk is. It's just too hard to measure it. And so we move on and just exclude entire swaths of the population. And the reason why, on a personal level, I wanted to look into this is because my mom had a terrible credit score. And I remember her growing up, she'd be like, even though we have a bad credit score, it does not mean we're bad people. And in America, your credit score is your destiny. It's like determines whether you can get a car or an apartment or sometimes even a job. And so how can we make sure that we are allowing all the talent and out there to reach opportunities that they can't reach? Well, we have to break down these systemic measures of exclusion. And I had a very personal case study for wanting to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I think there's like an element of research and curiosity there that I'm hearing as well, in terms of like not just taking these systems for granted that exist, but like go into them. It's not just credit score, but how did this come to be? What is it not taking into account? What other signals are there that can then be used in order to develop these business models? And as you were doing that, was there anything that you found, right, knowing, that you had been an Acumen fellow, was there a, I don't know, like a guide for you, right? Like a design thinking or framework or research methodology or anything that you used to help uncover that? Or was it just kind of like, ask a question and then ask the next question and then you found the opportunity?
No, I think that in this case, it was my work prior to starting Solstice. I worked in India and Pakistan with Acumen, and I was working in low income villages in India and Pakistan, and realizing that in developing countries, companies were trying to figure out how to have an alternative measure of credit worthiness. And looking at other factors like social connectivity and other behavioral characteristics that could determine whether someone's going to pay back a microloan. So institutions were already working on that abroad. Plus, when you looked abroad, like, online payments were accelerating, with M-Copa in East Africa, way faster than Apple Pay ever came to the United States. And so I love the idea of taking solutions from the global South and bringing them to the United States, because there's this hegemony of thinking that the West exports all the innovation out to the global South, and that's just not the case. So I was actually inspired by folks like Grameen Bank and the microfinance institutions and all these random controlled trials looking at poverty alleviation in developing countries and how do we bring that to the United States.
Yeah, I remember being in Kenya at probably a similar time, and seeing like mobile money there on like simple function phones and being like, God, we are so slow in the U.S. How do we how do we not have
Talk
this
about
yet? Right?
leapfrogging. Yeah. And you're seeing the
Totally.
same thing with the leapfrogging of technology in renewable energy. You see
Yeah.
it exploding in places like Pakistan and East Africa and West Africa, and the rate of acceleration is more impressive than in the United States.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and actually, the episode that we're currently just finishing in production right now is the founder's name is Mercedes from Kipu Bank in Latam, and similarly, they're using all these signals to essentially create like creditworthiness scores for like micro entrepreneurs. And similarly using like machine learning and all these other methods in order to give like more favorable and more reasonable microloans to entrepreneurs. And it's just wild, like the reach. And again, I like look at that and I'm like, how do we not have that here? So well, so I want to kind of jump ahead in the journey here. So you built this. I'm sure there's so many lessons. You've published some incredible content. There's some other great podcasts that we'll point to as well. But I want to kind of jump ahead to the journey that ultimately led to Solstice Bank being acquired, and then you deciding to leave. What I'm sure feels like, at least as other entrepreneurs have described it, as their baby. And what ultimately, like, from very first mention that you thought about potential exit, what led you to identifying the opportunity and then ultimately deciding to go forward with it?
We didn't actually intend to sell when we did. We had been raising our Series A, so pretty early, and we had oversubscribed our Series A. It was supposed to be 7 million. We raised 12 million, and we were a few weeks away from closing. And up until then, we'd had a couple of competitors reach out and say, "Hey, are you interested in selling the company?" And our response was like, "No, it's too early. We still have a long way to go." And then actually in those final few weeks before close, my father passed away. And I realized in managing that situation that, I had given up everything in my life. I put off a lot of things for work. I was entirely consumed by work. It was my entire identity. It's what I did from when I woke up to when I went to sleep. And at that point, it had been 7 years. I was also very tired. And even though our Series A was oversubscribed and it was coming off 2 years where we 7x'd our revenue and we had excellent KPIs, it was still hard to raise that 12 million. And so I had a realization. I'm like, why am I putting off my whole life for this company? Is there another way? And my husband said, maybe you should consider some of those offers you've gotten. And then I said, okay, on a Saturday, I was like, you know what, maybe I would be open to it as I'm grieving my father's passing. And then on Monday, another company reached out and said, hey, are you thinking of selling? We hear you're raising. So then we go back to our board and I go back to my co-founder and she's like, okay, let's explore it. We go back to the board. The early investors are very excited to explore an exit. And so it takes us on a very different path where we, do a quick auction. Like you don't do a global auction unless you have more time. We felt like we didn't have that much time. So we wanted to do a quick auction. We got advisors. They went out to 20 potential buyers. We, got 4 bids, and then we chose one to kind of move forward with. And we thought it would close faster than it did. Another lesson in selling your company. It takes way longer than you think it will. And then a year after my father died, we closed on the sale. It was a whirlwind journey. I got married in the same month that we sold the company.
Wow.
So just white knuckling that whole year. And we sold to Mitsui, which is a large Japanese conglomerate, and their interest was in having more of a stake in North American clean energy. They'd already invested in a solar developer and had done well as an investment for them. And that solar developer was a customer of ours who liked our company. So that's how we originally got connected to them. We closed in October of 2022, which was arguably the last good year in the market to do M&A. There's a lot of M&A happening now, but it's often distressed M&A. And so we lucked out, and it wasn't the expected journey.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. And thank you for sharing that. And also in all of that, so sorry to hear about your loss in the process. And
Thanks.
I'm just trying to even imagine like what that would be like, of just like going through like a big, work moment and then something like that, happening. And maybe part of the reason I think I'm even stumbling on my words is actually just a month ago we lost like one of our really dear friends, and it was also like kind of during a busy time, and it was this, I just found myself in this like really weird, kind of space where like absorbed in the work, want to be there for his family, want to be there for the service, want to be there for all these things, and it can be like so much to juggle, all
Yeah.
these things at the same time, and for something that even hits, I would imagine closer, I can only imagine that was a lot. Like, how did you even create the mental space to move through such a big conversation during such a moment?
After my father died, it was the first time in 8 years of Solstice that I couldn't go to work, and there was a two
Uh,
week period where I really was grieving, and I was sleeping a lot, and I couldn't go to work for the first time. And I said to my chief of staff, Sam, and my co-founder Sandhya, like, I really just need help. I need a couple weeks to get back on my feet. And so the only reason why I was able to move through this period was because I had, again, excellent teammates who, when you think about the journey of a founder, I mean, there's gonna be low points no matter what, and whether you get through those low points is really dictated by who can pick you up when you're on that low point. And I love these people who I've gotten to work with. They're incredibly competent, kind humans, and so they allowed me a couple weeks to recollect myself and then be like, let's move full steam ahead on an M&A process. So
wow.
it's more testament to them.
Yeah. I mean, the importance of a team, but I mean, it sounds like you also asked for help. And I think that's been interesting in on this show, some of the other entrepreneurs that we've talked to, like when things were just, you know, like the craziest thing I feel like I've heard in the entrepreneurship journey. Right. And then, and that's such a theme, is like people being able to ask for help. And I almost feel there's this like audit that entrepreneurs should do like every quarter of just like, if disaster struck, what would I do? Like, could I turn to people for support both inside and outside the company?
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you had that. But I can only imagine, like, just, yeah, even the fact that you're able to create the mental space for that, I probably shows a bunch of like mental acuity, and I imagine quite a bit of self work as well in terms of, what does it mean to be a leader, and how do you move through these things, and how do you stay principled during these really hard times? So I really appreciate you sharing that.
And thanks for that. I think that also, sometimes your body gives out and you have to listen to your body. And that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't expect to have to grieve so much. And so listening to your body, and in general, founders don't sleep enough, right? Like, so sleep when you feel tired, and asking for help, and hopefully prior to asking for help, you've built deep relationships with other people such that you've helped them in their down moments. And the more you help others in their down moments, the more comfortable you'll be asking for help. And this is part of an ethos of actually Techstars. Techstars is always talking about giving first. If you give first, then inevitably you'll get it back in more than you gave, actually, because we live in a reciprocal relationship with other people, and in our environment, and
Yeah.
we're interconnected and we need each other. And what is the purpose of life if not deep connection with other humans?
Yeah.
And this work of social impact, what is the purpose of it if not deep connections with other
Yeah.
humans?
Yeah, I just a few threads that I will end up adding these to the show notes, because if anybody's curious on some of these topics, I think um, like on that connection, right? If and I don't know if I'm mentioning a competing Ivy League school here, Steph, so you have to forgive me. But in
Oh, they're
Stanford,
all
I
the
know in the
same.
MBA program, they're all the same. Okay, in the Stanford MBA program, I know one of the most popular courses is lovingly referred to, I guess, as the touchy feely class. But the authors have a book called Connect. And I think it's fascinating. Talks about the importance, and even gives guidance on like how do you build more meaningful human connection, and there was something that you said that uh, is another aside here. So my wife does executive leadership coaching for high scale organizations. And when she went through her own leadership or coaching certification at Georgetown, one of the practices, I'm probably getting the name wrong here, but it's like somatic coaching. And sometimes she'll just ask me this question of like, well, how's your body feel in this moment? Whether it's like, there's a new opportunity, as an example with work. And she's like, yeah, how's your body feeling? And I kind of look down and I'm like, how do you even answer that question? But I'm like, it feels tense, right? And it's like, okay, like follow that. Like, why is this situation creating so much tension for you? And other times it's been like elation or whatever. And it's like, I think the attunement to like the body is something that is a much more recent discovery for me, and it's like wildly accurate. Anyway, this is about interviewing you, but I just like, there's a couple things that you're threading on here that I just feel are really powerful tools, and so we'll add those into the show notes.
I totally agree, and there's like I found that I was manifesting stress in my body, even though I wasn't projecting it to other people. I was losing my hair a lot. And having trouble sleeping, right? And so really just being in tune with your body can help you figure out what to do next. And then the other book I would also recommend that I read, my favorite book in the last year that I read, was The Service Berry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She also wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a seminal book in the ecosystem ecology space. Climate people are obsessed with braiding sweetgrass. The Service Berry book is very short. It's like less than 100 pages, which is great for this ADHD-addled world. And the tagline for it is, all flourishing is mutual. Meaning we live in this interdependent reciprocal world. Our economy doesn't often reflect that interdependence, but we rely on each other. And generally speaking, one person's flourishing is not at the exclusion of another person's, if we're all connected. So it's a great book. I would recommend. Everyone always asks like, what business or leadership book should I read? And my recommendations are always not the business books. They're always books about ecology, or my favorite leadership book is Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. So
yeah, I get along in many ways here, Steph. This resonates so much. And even on that notion of like give, like if you give, then later you'll reap the rewards. Adam Grant actually has research, and I'm trying to remember the name of that specific book, but he does that research of people that have that really like giving mentality. They actually perform the highest and worst in the workplace, because sometimes they give too much.
Give and take.
They're not even turned on it. Thank you. Yep. So we'll add that to the show notes as well. So okay, I want to move us on this journey. So you go through acquisition. So am I right in understanding it took about 11 months in order from introduction, from when you started auction to closing the sale?
It took a year. Yeah.
A year. Is about a year. And then what about integration afterwards? Like, were you a part of the integration afterwards? Did you leave once the deals was done? What was that like?
I mean, real practical integration was 6 months. We had pretty clear milestones that we had to reach to really integrate with the parent company. We were an independent subsidiary though. So in some ways it was much simpler because we didn't have to change our brand. We kept our whole team, and then the full kind of integration period was 2 years. I left at the end of 2024 after the integration period with the parent company.
So many lessons just on that journey, but I want to keep this more on on the you and what it was like to move through that. So that's 2024. We're now in 2026, and I know you're growing a new venture, and kind of bring me through here your own experience of closing the door on Solstice, right? Leaving and then moving into, I would imagine, some period of like, hopefully you came up for air a little bit, right? But then I know you were also, teaching at Yale shortly thereafter. and then ultimately deciding to start on your own, especially what you said at the beginning of the show, which is like, I'm never going to be an entrepreneur. Walk me through what ultimately led you to start the entrepreneurial journey again.
Yeah, so I left Solstice and then I had 6 glorious weeks off where I ran around asking everyone who wants to have lunch with me. And I felt in a lot of ways liberated because I didn't have to have the stress of how many, teammates' mouths to feed and raising money and then operating the company. It was simpler. But I love Solstice, and the reason I was able to leave so easily was because everyone just moved up one spot. So my co-founder was a COO, she became the CEO, and everyone else just slotted up because we'd built a good leadership team. So it was very seamless for me to leave. I decided to leave because I felt like I had spent 10 years consumed by one problem and one solution, and I was interested in exploring other solutions. Always known that I want to stay in climate and energy. That's a huge need to develop more solutions in the space. And I just happened to be asked by Yale to teach this class on commercializing climate tech. Again, very lucky, but I spoke at Yale. It was the first time back since I was an undergrad in like 20 years. And after the panel, which was actually on social entrepreneurship, I was asked by the head of the Center for Business and Environment, this amazing guy named Stuart Dessous. He asked if I wanted to teach this class. I said, yeah, I have time now. That would be great. So I started teaching, and I asked Yale if I could democratize access to the class because it's not great that only 60 very privileged students get access to this curriculum that's not really readily available in the world, but we need more education about. So they said, yeah, do it. So that's when we started putting out educational videos online on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube about climate tech and clean energy. And then started a startup. That show is called Future in Bloom. Part of Future in Bloom's purpose is to create documentaries showing how clean energy is impacting communities and workers across the country. Last year, we lost a lot of climate policy, and it got held up in these political fights. And I think we forgot as people how unifying clean energy can be, how good it can be for people, how much prosperity it can bring to local communities, how many jobs it can bring, how it's part of the next, industrial revolution, and it's going to bring economic development in a way we haven't seen in decades. And yet it's stuck in this political quagmire. So I wanted to create stories that reminded people that it's good for us to get more clean energy. Like, we should all want that regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. So that's the kind of storytelling I've been doing. It's like part journalism, part education, and part documentary, telling stories of real heroes across the country who are working on building clean energy. So that's the new startup. It's been fun. We did our first documentary about the largest geothermal plant in a tiny town in Utah, 1,600 people, about why they love geothermal. We are working on a fusion energy documentary. We've crisscrossed the country talking to fusion companies in the United States about the geopolitical impact of fusion energy. And then
fascinating.
Just last week, I was in the Navajo Nation doing a documentary about solar projects there. So we're having a lot of fun.
Oh, cool. Wow. Well, we'll add some links here in the show notes for users to follow along on some of these journeys. I know I can't wait to see some of these content pieces. So I'm really excited to follow that journey. If you were to go back in time to and like Steph from, let's say Steph from like right in the middle of exiting Solstice, Steph, if you went back to that Steph, and that Steph was giving future Steph advice, like, hey, as you're starting out on this journey, maybe it's weird to give yourself advice, probably something you've thought about already, but like, what's like, as you're starting out on this journey, you know, what what would the part of you that has built and grown an organization and then been exiting, like, kind of give, like, what advice would you give to, like, hey, as you're starting out on this, like, these are the moments to cherish. This is the advice that's just going to make you the most successful, you know, and if you play your cards right, you'll get to this place where you'll, you know, you can keep going, or you could earn or earn out, whatever it is. But um I feel like that's the worst asked question that maybe I've ever had on this episode, but maybe you track where I'm going. Like, where does successful Steph give, like, you know, newly started Steph advice on how to make the most of this journey?
Are you talking about the current Future and Bloom journey, or if I were to talk to myself at the beginning of
Yeah,
Solstice?
your if you were to talk to yourself during the acquisition process, of kind of like the sign that, like, hey, I've made it once as an entrepreneur, right? And now you, future Steph, even though you're just starting again, like, remember these things as you go through this journey. Like, you know, here's the guidance I have for you.
Yeah, some of my top lessons are it is more important to work with amazing teammates than it is to work on the perfect product or the perfect industry. And so ultimately my North Star when I was deciding what to do next was who can I work with that's amazing? And so I spent a lot of that exploration time talking to people across different industries and really truly exploring before coming to a place where I wanted to spend the next 10 years of my life working on media production. Secondly, to I've learned to be less afraid of failure. I was so afraid of failure when I started Solstice. I was so afraid of failure that I went to business school while I started Solstice because I thought that that would be a good backup plan in case Solstice didn't work out.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake because my attention was divided, and ultimately Solstice started taking off after I left business school. And and failure is just a step in the road. Like I felt like I was failing every single day at Solstice. And the trick is just to get up one more time than the number of times you've been knocked down. That is the trick to this whole entrepreneurship thing. You know, they call a founder that started 4 startups and failed, that's someone they call a failed entrepreneur. But then someone who started 5 startups, the first of which have failed and the 5th is a success, that is just called a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah,
We
yeah, I love that.
It's just about getting one more shot than the number of times you failed. And then the third thing I would say is like be really in tune for where you are in your life. When I started Solstice over a decade ago, I was in a different place in my life. I really didn't care about lifestyle needs or rest. And so I was able to be hard charging for, a decade. But at this stage in my life, I made 3 lists when I was preparing what to do next. And one list is everything I suck at, everything I am worse at than the normal person, everything that comes harder to me and I'm slower at. I made a list of everything that I'm better at than the average person, stuff that comes easily, stuff that puts me into a state of flow. And I made a list of what I thought my ideal life could look like. And what I wanted my life outside of work to look like. And at the beginning of the Solstice journey, I would not have made the 3rd list. And at this stage of my career, I really prioritized that list. And based on these 3 lists, what you suck at, what you're good at, and what you want your life to look like outside of work, I was able to figure out how to thread the needle between those.
I love that so much. I'm like, I mean, I'm gonna go do that homework assignment like right after this episode. I really love that. We'll give that guidance. And so the list was like, what do you suck at? What are you great at doing? And then what do you really want life to look like? And not just at the end of this journey, but it sounds like during the journey
Day to
itself.
day.
Like, yeah,
Yes.
day to day. Yep. Love that.
Who do you want to surround yourself with? How do you want to show up for your friends and family? How do you want to engage with beauty and art in the world? And what's worth it to you to give those things up for?
Yeah, very cool. And can I ask, is that something that you've just kind of developed over time? Is that something that you're pulling from like designing your life method or anything else?
No, I don't think I got it from anyone else. I was just writing it
Yeah,
down because ultimately I
cool.
think it comes from a real assessment of strength. So maybe it's like the Strengths Finder framework that you basically getting in tune with your strengths. Because I think ultimately, if you operate within your strengths, you will both achieve mastery and excellence, but you will also enjoy your day to day a lot, and work won't feel as much as work is, as operating within your weaknesses. And of course, early in your career, you have to do everything. You have to. I mean, I really don't think early in your career someone should just do the things that they want to do. I think there's so much learning that comes from doing things that you don't want to do, and a lot of grit that comes from that. But as your
Yeah.
career goes on, you can specialize more in your strengths, and that will help you, I think, achieve mastery in a different level.
In those areas. Yeah, that resonates so much, and I think that's so. Again, just you've kind of been there, and then you've started back at the beginning, and so I think that the your ability to like focus attention onto that and give that guidance to entrepreneurs. I mean, again, like for me, it's just it's resonating like wild, and it's so valuable to hear. Um, Steph, there is so much I feel like we could go on, but I know the clock is ticking on this. If you have a few more moments, I'd love to ask you like our kind of rapid fire questions that we do in our lightning impact round at the end of the show here.
Sure.
And so if it works, I can jump into those. Cool.
Sounds good.
Uh, what is one mistake that you've made that you really hope future entrepreneurs won't make?
It took us 8 years to hire someone to do HR in our organization. So me and my co-founder, we were the head of HR for 8 years, and that was a huge mistake because there are inevitable people problems that will fall out of the sky and kind of blow up your planned day. And someone who's a specialist in that and who can own that and then only elevate and bubble up the most serious stuff is really helpful.
Helpful. Out of curiosity, how many people were you when you pulled in the HR lead?
Uh, Probably around 40 or 50.
40, 50. Cool. Helpful. Um, what is one thing that you wish all impact investors would know and internalize more when investing in social enterprises?
I raised a lot of money at Solstice and had to go through a lot of due diligence. And never once did I get asked by an investor, how do you retain your talent? How do you treat your people? And that is one of the most important reasons why a business succeeds or fails. If you do
Yeah.
not retain talent, if you do not attract talent, if you do not treat your people well, if you do not make them feel like they have upward mobility, they will leave. And then all the business or the social enterprise will struggle to fill that gap. And so I always thought it was the weirdest thing that nobody asked me what we did to make sure our people were satisfied.
I, this one cracks me up too because I think similar just on raising people are like you always invest in the team and then your deal room is just like financials, projections, like legal stuff, and it's like so little like on the human side of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that resonates so much. Um, what is a leadership skill that you wish you could turn on that would make you an even more effective business leader?
I have a lot of skill deficiencies that I wish I could turn on. Excel continues to
Heard.
be one of them. I, in terms of a leadership skill, as a leader, you have to do as much communication internally as you do externally in order to bring the whole team along, in order for them to understand the strategy. And so I wish I had taken more time to write an internal newsletter for my company because I felt like we had frequent offsites. At one point, we had quarterly offsites because we were a remote company. But I felt like I was always catching people up to what the strategy was. And I wish that I had done a better job of bringing them along in the interstitial moments, because then it would have been more efficient.
Interesting. I don't always look to big tech CEOs for guidance, but I was literally just listening to a podcast with Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, and he was talking about, like, he's just, when things start to come up, he's like asking questions about it, talking to everybody about it, and then by the time they actually make a decision, it's more like, Jensen, what took you so long? Like, but he's like, it's like the job of a leader is actually to influence human behavior proactively. I thought it was a really interesting point. So anyway, that newsletter comment kind of makes me think about that, and again, another actionable piece that I'll probably take from this stuff. It's wonderful.
Yeah, we did a good job of external newsletters and investor updates and quarterly and board meetings. But I think we could always do more to make sure that everyone is aligned within the organization.
Yeah, I love it. You spoke to this a little bit before, so maybe it's like, see earlier in the episode, but what is a quote, ritual, or activity that you turn to for strength when things get super hard?
Marcus Aurelius has a quote about, it's not a question of whether you'll meet challenges, it's a question of how you react to them. And I find that very applicable to daily life. And Viktor Frankl, who I referred to as my favorite leadership book author, he also talks about the space between stimulus and response. Is one in which, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but like you can make a choice as to what you do with that. You don't have to respond to stimuli. And that is a lesson that I've learned in freediving too. Freediving, that panic feeling in your chest when you want to breathe underwater, that's actually just carbon dioxide building up. It's not your need to breathe oxygen. So you just have to tell yourself to calm down. So all of these things and experiences are all capturing the same thing, which is that when your instinct is to freak out, the answer is to probably go more slowly.
Yep. Yeah, resonates so much. Literally, that Frankl quote was just a big part of life in the last month, right? Yeah, between stimulus and response is space, and in that space is our power to choose, right? And in that choice lies our growth and freedom. So, I love that. We'll include those in the notes. And Steph, very last question: where can we follow you? How can we support your work? If people want to be the first to know about the documentaries when they release, how can they get their hands on those?
Yeah, you can find me on social media, so on LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. It's all the same username. It's Sky Speirs, SKYSPEIRS. It's just my initials and my last name, Sky Speirs. And our show is called Future in Bloom. It's about building a world in which we all thrive, in which human nature and tech can actually work together, and hope to see you online.
Amazing. We will include all those in the show notes. I know on that notion of thriving, I feel like just some of the tips that you've given here on the internal side, on the business side, are going to help me thrive. I know they'll help our listeners thrive. So Steph, thank you so much for your time. I know you did this coming right out of a board meeting. I'm even more impressed as a result of that, but so glad we had this time, and really grateful for you sharing your incredible insights and story with the community here.
Thanks for what you do to support social entrepreneurs, Mark, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Steph, have a wonderful day.
You too.